and welcome back to the BA Project, where we talk about the good, the bad, and this week we'll talk about the functional side of business analysis. I'm joined by my two co-hosts. Catherine, say hi.
Hello.
Andrew, hello.
Hello.
Hi. And this week we'll be joined by a very special guest who we all know and love. And we're going to be chatting to our special guest about the functional crossover between business analysts and functional and technical consultants within the workplace. So if we'd like to introduce our very special guest to the stage, we've got Obi. Hello, Obi.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Obi.
Hey, Obi.
How's it going?
Yeah, not too bad. Awesome to be here. Thanks for the invite.
You're very welcome. We all know you to be a very funny man, so no pressure, but let's be entertaining.
No pressure.
Yeah. So, Obi, do you want to just start off by introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a principal functional consultant. I'm sure that means a whole bunch of different things to a whole bunch of different people and companies. But I've been in the industry now for around 9 to 10 years-ish. Started off working in a support role. And I was quite lucky in that support role because it exposed me to various different CRM systems pretty early. Sage CRM, Info CRM, Salesforce, and of course Dynamics. For a short period of early on in my career, I kind of convinced myself that I should focus on Sage CRM, and I kind of moved away from Dynamics quite quickly until a friend sort of hit me with a reality check that Dynamics is much better approach. So yeah, I've been in there since now 9 years. I've joined the current company Codec back in, I want to say, November 2022. Long time ago now, but yeah, so far so good. Been a great journey so far, and worked with some amazing BAs in my time as well.
Lucky you, getting to work with all those lovely folk. So yeah, we're really happy to have you here, Obi. And I suppose the thing that we wanted to talk to you most about was having the sort of functional crossover between BAs and functional technical consultants, because in some cases it is quite a fine line to tread, but there's definitely benefits to staying in your own lane. And there's a whole multitude of benefits of crossing over and collaborating. So if it's okay with you, Obi, there's a few topics that we'd like to take you through. We'd like to target the questions towards yourself. But of course, BAs are going to BA and we're going to want to jump in and talk. So if it's okay with you, we'd maybe like to probe you on a few more questions, and we'd love to collaborate with you on those topics. That's okay?
Absolutely. I've never met a BA who doesn't want to jump into a question. So yeah, absolutely.
We'll not take that as an insult, even if you meant it that way.
He said we were great 30 seconds ago. So
I did. That's a fair point. I did. I'll take that back.
So the first topic we want to start off with is understanding striking the balance. So striking the balance, I suppose, is what we've just talked about, that there is a fine line and there is a very harmonious balance for us to be able to find. And there's a few topics that we want to run through which will help us identify what that happy balance is. And the first dedicated topic that we have is understanding user stories, which is one of the most fundamental parts to delivery, in my opinion, as a business analyst. And one question that we have around that for you, Obi, to start off with is probably quite open-ended, but what level of detail you expect as a functional consultant, somebody who is designing the solution, what level of detail do you expect?
Level of detail I expect in the user story. Yeah, it's pretty open-ended. Can I just say a huge amount and that's it? Leave it at that. That might be easier. Definitely a massive amount. To be honest, detail is crucial to user stories. If you want sort of using user stories, especially working in agile or agile, as the kids call it, agile these days, then you're gonna have huge problems across pretty much the whole life cycle of a project. Testing, development, build, even understanding requirements are best leveraged through user stories. So in terms of their importance, it kind of ensures a successful project. That definitely cannot be overstated. And they directly contribute to pretty much every part of a life cycle of a project. So yeah, I'm a big, massive believer in user stories, and actually using the right tool for user stories is important. I know a lot of people use Jira, and I've used Jira in the past as well. Awesome. A lot of people use ADO, as in Azure DevOps. amazing, but some people use Excel and Word and whatnot, and it just doesn't really have that same impact, I suppose. But yeah, absolutely crucial, definitely crucial.
Trey or Catherine, anything you want to comment on?
Yeah, I suppose one of the questions that I have for Obi is when we talk about kind of level of detail in user stories, one of the things that BAs are told is that we should try and keep our user stories negotiable so that the solution architect can have a negotiation of what design he wants to use. So we wouldn't be prescriptive in buttons or icons and that kind of thing. Where do you think we should sit in negotiation? Are you happy that we prescribe, or would you be more comfortable with kind of keeping it really open-ended?
I'd say open. In my personal experience, I'd say open-ended, and there's a reason for that. Developers are interesting characters. I'm sure you guys already know. Developers are very, very astute and they like to get their creative juices flowing a little bit. And if you keep a user story sort of, detail heavy yet restricting and based upon the actual solution, and very compact, it kind of stops that creative juice flowing, and they're kind of restricted to developing a particular way. So I am used to working with, and I encourage a lot of BAs to work like this. A user story should remain solution agnostic. You shouldn't really mention what system you're using, what portion of system you're using, what feature you're using. It's just mostly, I suppose, understanding the business requirements and then having those business requirements broken down into manageable chunks within a user story, as opposed to writing down in the acceptance criteria exactly what you want from each requirement, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Obi, when you're starting a project, from the functional perspective, would you, before you go in and before you actually are boots on the ground, starting in delivery, would you meet with the FA or the BA and get together and say, listen, this is how I document stories, show me what you would usually do, and do you find a common ground, or is it more prescriptive where you say, this is how I write my stories, get on board?
It's more of a collaboration effort, and more of an understanding. There's been occasions where I've brought something to the table, and a BA's also brought something totally different to the table, and that particular process was a lot better than mine. But essentially, we find the positives in based upon our experience. So there might be some things that I've done previously, just purely based on experience, that I can bring to a user story, and likewise, there could be something that a BA would bring to the table in terms of their experience with user stories. And it's about finding the right balance, something I'm comfortable with, as well as something that the BAs are comfortable with. Because the worst thing that you can do on a project is a BA not happy with the user stories that he or she is writing. So if they're comfortable, the project's going to be comfortable. So it's about striking a balance. Exactly that.
And Obi, do you think it's always realistic to keep it sort of high level and solution not targeted? If you're agile, you've got to go fast and you've got to be within budget. Is that always realistic to keep it open-ended when you've got those three sort of criteria?
Yeah, it is difficult. I suppose it depends on the project, but again, if you have time and the means and the capability, then yeah, for sure. But again, as we all know from certain projects that we have experience in, that it's not always easy. Timelines, project demands, resourcing, etc., can sometimes get in the way. But yeah, I'm a massive proponent of if you have the capability, then try putting as much detail as you can, yet still remain solution agnostic. It's a difficult process, but I mean, I've always said, and sorry to sort of extend the question a little bit, but I've always said to the people that I work with is probably the first 2 sprints are important, but the test sprints, anything that could go wrong potentially will go wrong. It's just about learning from those first 2 or 3 sprints, getting a sort of nice exposure to how other people work within the project, and then you refine your user stories, and then you can sort of push forward and essentially find a balance.
I think that's a really good point, and be mature enough to go into that review open and honest, and maybe lack of ego, unlike mine, Catherine. Being able to put your ego aside and say, yeah, that didn't work, which is difficult to do sometimes.
I know, but you mentioned the word balance there. which kind of leads us on nicely to our next topic, which is really about balancing the detail and the flexibility. You mentioned that devs like the ability to have some creative flair and to put their spin on it. I've also had experience of where a dev will do exactly what is written in front of them. And if there's not a dev task to support the user story, so again, like if we're talking a waterfall methodology, we've got lots of time available to do all of the best practices and get all of dev tasks peer reviewed and everything makes sense. But if we're going fast and we're working in an agile way, I've had experience where a dev will just literally lift what's in that story, and if it doesn't define that it's a checkbox rather than a boolean or something like that, there's no consistency across the product because everybody will just do whatever they want. So it's like, how do you get, in your experience, Obi, like catering, suppose delivery method versus, waterfall versus agile, and then how do we get that balance between the detail that we put in, but also given that flexibility? Like if you were to onboard a new BA to your project, how could you help them understand what you expect?
It's difficult, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why it's difficult, but I suppose in my experience, the main reason it's difficult is developers are creatures of habit. They tend to be creatures of habit. If you give a developer and you tell a developer to essentially develop this, they will do it line by line and absolutely fine. But there could be something missing from that user story, or it might not tie into a different user story that they'll totally miss. So in terms of a balance, I expect user stories to provide enough detail to guide the development team, to guide the developer without advising on, I suppose, specific technical solutions. That will allow as I mentioned before, the developer to sort of borrow from their own technical expertise, get the sort of creative juices flowing a little bit as well. But in terms of onboarding a BA, again, very similar to what I'm actually going through at the moment. If you were to onboard a BA, it'd be difficult because the project I'm in at the moment, the company I'm working for at the moment, I think we're up to like sprint 17, 18, 19, 20, something crazy like that. So everyone's got that balance already. Everyone's worked together quite well. A new BA joining would have to, in my opinion, look back at current development and then trace that back to the current requirements, and then trace that back to the current user story, see how it was imagined, how it was built, and how it was imagined, and how it was tested as well. It's pretty important. And just on that, I appreciate it can't be done all the time. It's difficult, but sometimes you'll find giving developers a little bit more freedom, trusting them a little bit more, it can result in solutions that both meet the requirements, but also have that pretty cool factor. Does that make sense? There's a lot of, I think what a lot of people miss when it comes to user stories is the ability to make things look a little bit more prettier. Usually the focus is on just the requirements, just the functionality, and developers know all the secrets of a product, especially if we're talking about dynamics. They'll know all the secrets and know all the pretty buttons that they can put into place and whatnot, yet still meet the requirements. So yeah, that's obviously, of course, my opinion. I'm sure a developer will agree.
Yeah, like I think that's a really important part of the project in general, and even the team, because I love when, like, chatting with the developer or chatting with the technical lead, where he kind of says, what about moving this here or moving that there? And you're getting a better solution for the customer, and it's going to actually be a lot slicker than what would have been if they just read it straight off the page. So, like, I love having those kind of technical, sync ups or whatever you want to call them, between the BA and the development team, to make sure that all of those things aren't being missed. I think if you think of ourselves as working in silos and just doing that handshake between, I'm handing you over this and now you go design, I think you miss so much of personality and so much of creativity that can be brought into the solution. So I really like that idea. I think trust in each other is such a big part of it, and also being open to saying, this probably could be nicer.
Yeah, and that handover that you mentioned as well, that handover is very, very important. It can't ever just be, there you go, see you later. Yeah. It needs to be more of a collaborative impact. So anything that you're building, the BA's door should remain open at all times for a developer to sort of knock on the door and just essentially just say am I doing things right? Is this what you meant? Is this what should have been developed? I've got a question about X, Y, and Z. So yeah, absolutely, the door has to remain open for a BA, for a developer.
Cool.
Drew, Penny, for your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think we mentioned something interesting there about Sprint 17. I know the project he's referencing. I can't believe it's Sprint 17 already. And yeah, it's crazy. And with that, I know we're talking about negotiation and bringing user stories to a dev or to a funky to have that collaboration. But I imagine that collaboration at Sprint 1 versus Sprint 17 is so different. Do you still value those conversations at Sprint 17, even though you have that shorthand with your staff that are working around you?
So that's a very good question. To be honest, early on, it was a lot more difficult to understand certain things within the user story. Like I'll give you an example. There's various different methods to writing a user story. And again, this goes back to the initial question, but my experience with user stories was always using the Gherkin method, so as a X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I know. But I've become a firm believer now in maybe that wasn't so much of a good process, because again, coming to an understanding with the BAs that are working on our current project, I've come to understand and love, I suppose, the way they work a lot more efficient than using the Gherkin method, and I suppose it helps me as well. But no, it's difficult, because I think Sprint, if you're on Sprint 17 now of a project, so this kind of comes second nature. A lot of these, there's still some aspects where you might need to go back to the BA, or you might need to go back to the development team to figure out if things are still on target, or we're still meeting the requirements, and we're still building as per the acceptance criteria. I think once you start a process, writing down that process and then sharing that process and potentially going over that process every start of sprint helps a lot. It helps keep everything structured and a little bit more compact, and every sort of team understands exactly what's expected of them.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. Thanks for that, Obaid. And again, it's as if you know what these topics are. Nicely mentioned. Moving on to collaboration. So looking for your feedback on collaboration between the two different roles there, so the business analysts and the solution architects. So I know myself and Catherine have lots of experience of where our solution architects would come into our workshops, and again, thinking back to a waterfall approach where we have lots of dedicated time for those sort of discovery and then the design phase as well. We've got lots of dedicated time for workshops, and our solution architect can afford to come in and be there with us and to be somebody to bounce off during the workshops. But then again, with faster moving projects, I know we don't always have that opportunity. So what's your thoughts on solution architect being in the room with the BA and hearing every single requirement firsthand versus how the experience differs when you're not in the room and you're getting secondhand information?
It's going to be controversial, actually. I don't think they should be in the room initially. I think, again, speaking as a bit of a techie myself, we've got egos. We'd always want to say something, and sometimes that doesn't help. It's not very helpful. I mean, especially in the first couple of meetings, I'd say the SA doesn't need to be there, and let the BAs do whatever they need to do, and then maybe feedback once you actually see the requirements. It just makes things easier, because if you can imagine, if a BA is talking in terms of user story, a solution architect is there, or a principal functional in my case is there. They'd always think of solutions, and as I said at the start, an acceptance criteria and a user story needs to be solution agnostic. It doesn't need to include solutions. But me and a techie would always start thinking of a solution. Always constantly, the little brain will start ticking and understanding and maybe putting things in boxes that it doesn't really need to be. And it helps that the BA can do that and then bring it to the SA and then bring it to the principal functional consultant to then solutionize, as opposed to solutionize straight away. Does that make sense? Bit controversial, I know, because I know a lot of projects, a lot of companies actually have an SA in the room, but I think sometimes it's unhelpful.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. What was
my ego again?
Drew doesn't let everybody else speak. It's
If
okay.
you haven't got to this stage, this podcast is about me. Okay. I'll let you have the floor.
I've lost my train of thought. No, I haven't. Yeah, like I think it is an interesting one, because I've had experience with both where I kind of think, oh God, maybe we've gone too far ahead where now we're starting to solution. And I think the customer, when they see a technical lead, automatically just start asking questions about, well, what will that look like? And that can be really awkward for a tech lead because you obviously can't answer those questions at the time, but you don't want to, you don't want to be kind of caught out with it either. But then also I feel like when I'm the only one that's in the room, there's always that nervousness of I'd like to be able to link in with somebody else to even ask their opinion of, was that stakeholder saying that, or did I pick up on some sort of internal politics or or something like that. And it's always nice to have that little bit of somebody to lean on to kind of say, did I hear that right, or did I get it right? And I think sometimes it's less about the design and almost more about just having someone there as a support that can offer a different element than the BA can.
Absolutely. And just on that point, it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't collaborate. It's more a case of you don't want them in the room, or you shouldn't have them in the room. And if they are going to be in the room, they just need to be told to remain quiet. Again, techies speak a lot. I mean, you wouldn't expect it, but techies definitely speak a lot, especially with things that they're comfortable with, and they just can't help but solutionize. But they can still collaborate. They can still take things away. So after this particular session, they can have their own sort of insider session where it's just a small room between the BA and the SA. Because if they don't collaborate, they don't have to collaborate in that room. But if they don't collaborate, everything will suffer. I'm thinking complex user stories. They still need to be shaped, defined, and you can't. It's very difficult to define or even shape a user story without any sort of communication or collaboration. It's very, very difficult. And just on my last point, you have to keep the BA happy. You have to. A good relationship with the BA means a good project. If you don't have a good relationship with BA, and I've been there, if you don't have a good relationship with the BA, then the project will suffer for sure. The heartbeat of the project, I always say.
Oh, Obi, we should just stop now. We'll just go to credits. Go to credits.
I'm not going to mention any names, but yeah, absolutely.
That's gas. You actually made it such a good point. Obviously, us being great is a great point. But before that, you mentioned the collaboration between the BA and the SA. If we can have them in the room, and you're right, not every scenario calls for that. Excuse me, but in advance of that session, the BA and the SA and the PM being on the same page as to what they want from that workshop is really important. And throughout this podcast series, there's a recurring theme of the investment in prep before you get in front of a customer. And if everyone's on the same page with regards to the scope, the parameters of the question, what the proposed design might be, so we have those bumper files up when we're asking our questions, especially if it's a fixed price contract, it's going to go such a long way for the experience on that project, I guess.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think that leads us on nicely to the next sort of topic that we have to cover, which is the impact on the development process. So the level of detail or the quality of the stories, how does that impact the development process? So Obi, thinking back to your years of experience, can you call out any specific scenarios where you've had challenges arise from either the user stories being too high level or too detailed, without naming customer names or companies or anything? Are there any scenarios you can think of where it was challenging and how you overcame that?
Yeah, there's been a few. I mean, let's start with the positives, right? So there's been occasions where, again, I've walked into a project that was already sort of within its stage of where it's started to develop. The requirements are there. The user stories were already written, and I came into the project not really understanding how, because the user stories were in a pretty bad state, and the challenge there was testers couldn't test efficiently because the user stories that they had created their test cases off wasn't in a good state. And when I say not in a good state, it could be a huge, complex user story, but the acceptance criteria itself was, I don't know, 3 pages long. Absolute insanity, right? So it wasn't broken down. It wasn't put into various different slots where it needs to be. And the testers came along during the QA phase and essentially created a one gigantic test case based upon the one gigantic acceptance criteria. And if one thing went wrong, so let's just say they found a bug, I don't know, it could be a typo on that user story, the build of that user story, that whole story then fails. That whole story is then blocked until that bug is fixed. And then that kind of has a knock-on effect to the rest of the requirements within that user story. So that was a challenge, a big challenge. I mean, it was a couple of years ago now, but I'm never going to forget it. It was a huge challenge. But the positive spin on that is we quickly identified the issue, took it back to the business, took it back to the stakeholders, and essentially had an exercise to split the requirements across various different user stories, which became easier for the. It took longer, for sure, but it became easier for the testers to develop because they had more structured user stories, more structured acceptance criteria to work off. And yeah, that's essentially it. But there is, sorry, I'm going to carry on talking now. But there's a few things. I mean, high-level user stories, in my opinion, are awesome, are great, they work. I suppose there's clear expectations. You know exactly where you stand with the requirement. The accuracy of estimation is a lot better from a developer if it has a little bit of more detail in there. And testing is better because there's a lot more detail and it's a lot easier to develop test cases. But the other sort of side of that coin is there are a bunch of negatives. Flexibility, we touched upon before. Too much detail limits the sort of development team's ability to adapt, to change stuff, to be creative. It takes a lot longer as well. And then one of the key things, and I suppose it's the issue that we've had in the past, and I've had experiences with, is over-engineered solutions. Sometimes it's just a field on a form. We don't need 10 different pages of acceptance criteria and 10 different test cases and 3 different developers looking at a field on a form. Just create the damn field on the form. It's fine. So over-engineered solutions are definitely a negative in my experience, and the way to break those down is just to split a damn user story up. Split it up. It's fine. Doesn't matter if you have 200 user stories in a sprint or 20. It doesn't matter. Just split them up. And they're easier to work off of.
I love the fact that it's just a field on a form. I love this. I think this should be like a sticker on the back of a car. You know?
Yeah. Just a field on a form.
All the heartache we've had over that conversation with customers.
Yeah.
With the question about detail in a user story versus no detail. Am I on mute? No.
No.
Can you hear me?
No, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, he just didn't get the fanfare he was looking for when he spoke.
Yeah. Everybody nodding their head in appreciation at my voice. So see the abuse I get, Obi. It's unbelievable.
You wouldn't have it any other way, though. You love it.
No.
You love the attention. You love the abuse.
Yeah. I'm thinking of doing a second podcast after this, where I just break down this podcast and my contribution, like an after show. I do have a question, Obi. Sorry, getting sidetracked. Where would you stand on having your fields inside that user story? If we're talking about adding detail in and keep your acceptance criteria, are you keep my fields inside the story guy or have a separate data dictionary guy? And that could be a podcast in itself. I know that.
Yeah, it's definitely separate. It has to be separate. I mean, there's a pretty cool tool within, and my experience with Azure DevOps, not so much Jira anymore, but within Azure DevOps, you can have a bunch of extensions, add fields to the form. And what I'm a massive proponent of is keep that level of information off an acceptance criteria and put it within something called a solution overview, or again, as you mentioned, Drew, a data dictionary. It just makes things easier. And at the end of the day, we can quite easily just print that off at the end of a project, hand it over to a customer and say, there's all your fields, here's which table they sit in, and here's the data types, here's the schema names, etc. It's just a lot easier than having that level of detail within a user story, in my opinion. I mean, because if that's the level of detail you're going to have in the user story, then you should probably have the schema names, the data types, the file types, who can access that field, etc. It just makes things a little bit more messy.
Don't be giving any of our customers ideas.
It's horrible.
Thank you so much.
But maintaining a data dictionary within DevOps, Obi, good or bad?
Very good. Oof, very good. Yeah, I mean, Christina already knows this, right? But there's this amazing bit of innovation that these guys have come up with, the BAs have come up with, is absolutely extraordinary. But having essentially a data dictionary within DevOps called solution items, so every single user story has every single user story has acceptance criteria, and if you're mentioning a field, you just include the data dictionary that exists within ADO. So I think it's in the wiki, right, of Azure DevOps, right, Christina? Yeah. So that's a lot easier. It's a lot manageable. You're directly putting fields that exist in the data dictionary at the same time as you're putting them into the user story, and everyone's working off the same hymn sheet, and it just works. And it's been working for 17 sprints now, I reckon. So pretty good.
I was about to throw myself on the floor in a huff there, Obi, if you were saying you didn't like that. Honestly,
No.
My only claim to fame, and I thought you were just slapping me in the face there.
Best thing you've ever done. Definitely.
Times are bad if that's the best thing I've done in my life. Honestly, that means I've led a very unexciting life. But here, it might be true. It's that good. Thanks, Obi. You mentioned there about adapting as a developer, the ability to adapt to what's in the user story, and then you mentioned testing as well. So you mentioned your sort of not so happy experience of where the tester had a massive test script because the acceptance criteria was huge. And what I want to move on to next is our ability to adapt to those changing requirements. So not just business analysts, not just devs, QAs, everybody. You know, when we're in a project whereby the requirements are just ever changing through no fault of anybody's, but you know, maybe it's a customer that's just started on their digital transformation journey and they're not sure what they need and they don't know what the product's capable of, and they're struggling to settle on a requirement, and maybe they're working in an iterative way. So they see something built and they're like, oh, that would be good for X process. And as a customer, they think, oh, well, I can just go change my requirement. But in reality, that impacts the rest of the delivery process. So do you have any experience, Obi, of where you do have those stories that are, or the requirements are ever changing throughout your delivery, and how do you manage that as somebody who owns the solution?
Yeah, I've got huge opinions on this. I think change is good. Be open to it. Absolutely. It's within a software development cycle, no matter what software it is, change is always necessary. I think it's often people get confused with changes coming in, maybe disrupting development, maybe disrupting user stories that are already being created. But you can't really blame the stakeholders. You can't really blame the clients because they wouldn't have seen it the way you've envisioned or developed it until the time that you've developed it and shown them. So yeah, be open to it. The biggest mistake I think you can probably make, and I've made this in the past as well, is to hate change. It'll always happen. So you have to embrace it. You know. The other thing is, I think it's important to put a process in place for changes. I've seen often enough that doesn't happen. But definitely build a process, like a change control process, which kind of captures those things pretty early. And it's a little bit more adaptable, because without a change control process, it would be very, very difficult to manage. Without any sort of process for changes, will be difficult to manage. And be clear. I'd say be clear with the client. And I suppose I've done this many times in the past, and I've actually done this recently as well. But be very clear on the impact of any changes, because if something comes in, something has to drop out. If you've got a full capacity of a sprint, and a change happens to come in, and it's a pretty important change, then something else has to drop. And I think being clear and consistent with the client to let them know that a change may affect deadlines, cost, or complexity of a solution, I think that's key as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part that, you know, it maybe kind of is, sometimes gets lost around setting the scene of what you're about to do, even at, right before any sprint or any planning meetings happen. I think if you set out your stall of this is our interpretation of what changes are, this is how we're going to manage them, and this is what the impact of any change is, and obviously different changes can be minor, in terms of their impact, but I think it sets out that expectation that everything that's changing has to be thoroughly thought about. I think there's too many clients think about, let's just keep going, let's just make the change and move on, and don't maybe give it that time to look for the impact, or to really think about what other things it could be changing as well, other elements of the requirement or the build. So I think it's really important to have that conversation really openly and honestly within the project team, and that's also including like clients and customers as well.
Yeah, agreed.
And if I'm going to come at that from a resource management perspective, which is a little strange, but with changing requirements, sometimes it's not factored into how organizations will plan BA activity, because sometimes an organization will plan for everything to run smoothly and have a BA engagement, heavy at discovery, heavy at analysis, and taper off, and sometimes completely exit before we get to build and test. And we have to factor in as BA leaders, or as project managers, as organizations that offer BA activity, that your requirements need to be managed and they're not delivered until they're in production. So I think we need to build that into any of our plans, that we need to account for that potential change.
Lovely. Thanks, guys. So I think they were the real hot topics that I wanted to cover off with Obi, but I do have one more $1 million question for you, Obi. And it may be one that's kind of even controversial between myself, Drew, and Catherine, but I am always, and have been and will be, an advocate for the BAs to be more upskilled on the technology that we're delivering on. And my reasoning is, if I know what the product can do, I also know what the product can't do. So I'm able to shut things down straight away in a workshop because I know it's just not possible. But that's not, I suppose that's not a traditional BA. That is time consuming. That makes BAs more product focused, and I suppose in some scenarios less desirable in the market, because I'm a Dynamics BA and that's what I am. So I'm less desirable as a traditional BA. So what's your thoughts on BAs sort of becoming a bit more funky? Would you prefer them to be more funky, or do you want them to stay traditional?
No, I'd prefer it. I think things have changed now. If you were to ask me that about 6 or 7 years ago, I'd say they should remain very much outside of learning any functional skills within Dynamics. But nowadays, I think it's very important. I'm going to use Dynamics as a bit of an example, right? So I'd say 5 or 6 years ago, you could be a Dynamics consultant, and what that meant is you are a Dynamics consultant. You know everything about Dynamics, everything, every single sort of feature within Dynamics. Nowadays, when you say you're a Dynamics consultant, the next question should be: is that sales? Is that customer service? Is that Power Platform? Is that portals? I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things to learn. So I think the BAs are still trying to catch up to that a little bit. I'd say they need a general understanding of the product, and sometimes even a bit more of a general understanding for certain different aspects, like, for example, Power Platform. And I know it's a bit controversial saying this to you three, but I think it's very, very important. And in my experience, BAs don't know much about Power Platform. When it's gonna, I say it's gonna be the next big thing. It is the next big thing. I mean, everyone uses Power Platform now. It's very, very important from a project perspective. And I think the BAs nowadays are still stuck in the mindset of workflows and business rules and when and their requirements show sometimes, or the questions to the client sometimes show that, when it should more often than not be about Power Platform. Maybe some level of integration, what it can and can't do, just general understanding of Power Platform, general understanding of what a portal can and can't do as well. I think is very, very important. I'm not expecting them to know everything, every sort of little tiny thing when it comes to to development or functionality, but just a general understanding. It can't hurt, right? Especially now, it can't hurt.
Yeah, I think it's a comfort blanket as well for the BA, because as you said, Obi, the impact to your questions, if you know that a certain product doesn't do something as well or as, I don't know, as streamlined as maybe something else does, well, then you know not to ask that question, or you know how to wrap it in that context. But also now I'm really nervous about what I don't know about Power Platform. So thank you, Obi, for giving me some weekend homework. And also I'll have a meeting in your diary next week to learn more.
Oh, God. Yeah, no worries.
I'm by a long way, the least experienced, or the last person that should be talking about this subject matter on this podcast. I'm not functional at all. And compared to you guys, I know so little about the product. And
we know.
Yeah, no, it's obvious. Yeah. It's in my LinkedIn bio.
This is actually an intervention, Drew.
Yeah. You see around 4, right? That's what we're at. But I would have an understanding and be able to put those bump rails up I was speaking about, but I would have every single requirement validated and every feature I would play back to my SA. And regardless of how confident I think I am with a particular feature or part of the product, and that gives me comfort knowing that I have somebody there, like somebody like you, Obi, to be able to give that bucket of requirements and say, tell me, have we missed the mark here? Or tell me if this is feasible. But I agree with you guys. Being able to go into those conversations with the business and have that in your kit that you're able to say yes, no, without having to bring that big ticket item maybe to the SA, it's going to shave time off your elicitation plan, your validation time. If we're going to put me in a project versus you guys, I'd have to put my hand up and say you're going to get a different type of experience, because I think it is a scale, and I'm at a different scale to you guys with regards to my knowledge of the product.
Yeah.
Well, look how much charisma and flair you have, Drew. Who needs dynamics when you're you?
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
You are the Power Platform.
Exactly.
I don't need any help.
All right, folks. Well, Obi, we very, very glad and loved having you here. So thank you for coming on our little podcast. We hope you enjoyed yourself.
Glad to be here. Honestly, loved it. I'd love another invite. It'd be amazing.
Great.
Anytime.
Don't know what we can drill you on next time. We'll need to think of something topic for you.
Okay.
Also, you've given us loads of logos for bumper stickers, so now we've got our merchandise ready to go. So,
and I'll be taking my 10%. Appreciate that. Thank you, guys.
Cheap date, 10%. What's it that?
Thanks, Obi.
27.
The secret sauce.
No, it was the heartbeat.
Paraphrasing.
The heartbeat, yeah.
Okay, way off.
Well, as always, thank you for listening to the podcast. Whether you were dialing in, listening, or you were watching the podcast, thank you for being here. If you would like to comment on anything that we've talked about today, if you've got good experiences, bad experiences of working with functional consultants, or anything to comment on the level of detail in user stories, we would absolutely love to hear. And if you would like to write for the BA podcast, we would absolutely love that as well. So thank you for listening, folks. Catherine, Drew, Obi, farewell to you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.